How to handle North Korea, the United States and South Korea rolling out a missile defense shield just days after Pyongyang fired more test rockets, this time onto the Sea of Japan. Pyongyang angry and jittery over annual joint military exercises by Seoul and Washington. Then, of course, there's the diplomatic escalation with Malaysia after the assassination at Kuala Lumpur airport last month of Kim Jong-un's half-brother. We now know it was a potent nerve agent that was used, but the circumstances, motives, and the timing remain open to speculation. Nerves particularly frayed because Pyongyang, not the only place that's hard to read these days. There's China and a U.S. State Department that's gone mostly quiet since Donald Trump took office. What to make of the muted response, it seems, from Washington? What are the North Koreans making of it all? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at what is in escalation. With us from Denver, former ambassador to South Korea and Assistant Secretary of State, Christopher Hill, now Dean of the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies at the University of Denver. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure.
From Leeds University, we'll be joined by Chinese history lecturer Adam Cathcart, the author of Change and Continuity in North Korean Politics. With us from Manchester, North Korean exile Ji-Yoon Park. Thank you for joining us. She's with the European Alliance for Human Rights in North Korea. And here in the studio, we welcome back Benoit Kennedy, Vice President of the France-Korea Friendship Association. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Where to begin? How about with the travel ban North Korea has imposed on all Malaysians, not from entering, but from leaving the DPRK? Sharon Gaffney has the latest.
Worsening relations between North Korea and Malaysia as the fallout from the killing of Kim Jong-nam continues. Pyongyang has banned Malaysian citizens from leaving the country in a move it claims is aimed at ensuring their protection. The Malaysian Prime Minister described the ban as being tantamount to hostage-taking. Kuala Lumpur then responded by announcing that North Korean embassy staff would be prohibited from leaving its territory, but later extended the ban to cover all North Korean citizens.
We never planned to retaliate, but when we're confronted with a country that has breached international diplomatic norms and ethics, we have no choice. We're forced to take the same action because they've manipulated a murder investigation.
The Malaysian government says only 11 of its citizens live in North Korea, while about 1,000 North Koreans are believed to be in Malaysia. They've been caught up in a row that began with the killing of Kim Jong-nam at a crowded airport in Kuala Lumpur last month. There's growing speculation that North Korea orchestrated the attack on its leader's estranged half-brother. So far, 2 women have been arrested in connection with his killing, but police in Malaysia are seeking a further 7 suspects. Officers believe several of them may be hiding in the North Korean embassy in Kuala Lumpur and have sealed off the building. North Korea denies any role in the killing and has accused Malaysia of conspiring with its enemies.
Christopher Hill, what do you make of what is now can definitively be termed an assassination?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It's definitively termed and decided that this was definitely an assassination. And I think the Malaysian authorities are simply not going to put up with the idea of a foreign government and presumably even using diplomatic means to bring in what they needed to bring in to carry off this assassination. So I think the Malaysians have reacted as any other country would react. And I think the North Korean reaction is pretty typical of them as well. So I think Malaysia can kind of join the club in terms of North Korea just kind of losing its temper. Where this all goes is hard to say at this point. But, you know, the Malaysians have a history of not being really told what to do by others. They certainly have a very independent streak in them. And so I'm not sure where this is going to end up, but certainly I wouldn't count on Malaysian-North Korean relations being patched up anytime soon.
There's so many enigmas surrounding this still. Christopher, we're looking as we speak to you of those images from the CCTV footage when Kim Jong-nam was at the airport. There he is traveling all by himself. What does that tell you?
Yeah, it's, he was under Chinese protection in Macau, he and his family. It was rather remarkable to see him, having spent a few days apparently in Malaysia, to be traveling by himself. The Kim Jong-un regime has targeted him in the past, and we know that he actually sent a rather pathetic letter to his half-brother saying, please leave me alone. So clearly that didn't work. I think what it was obviously the North Koreans figured out how he travels, how he comports himself in airports, and they just essentially nailed him in a very professional and pretty grim and cold-blooded murder.
Adam Cathcart, what's your take on the circumstances under which he was poisoned?
Well, I think there's been a long-standing order to have him assassinated, or at least get moved out of the way. He had a habit of sort of talking to media members who would sort of bump into him outside of his various haunts, which were hotels in Singapore, golf clubs in Macau, and other places like that. And his statements were not to the liking of Kim Jong-un. And there's also the fact that this was a hereditary succession in North Korea. You have to remember that Kim Jong-un's main attribute, the only real thing on his CV when he came to power, was that he was the son of Kim Jong-il. And there's a massive propaganda apparatus around this bloodline, the Paektu succession. So it may seem quite obscure to us that this sort of exiled son was in Macau relatively harmless, but could have been a severe rival for Kim Jong-un, and his connections to the Chinese government, I think, made Pyongyang uncomfortable.
Should we make anything of the fact
to what Ambassador Hill has stated?
Go ahead.
What I would like to add to what Ambassador Hill had stated about the circumstances of the assassination is the use of this VX nerve agent is really remarkable in an international airport, and it's possible that North Korea really deeply miscalculated in using this. They also waited 5 days after the Malaysian authorities had stated that this was a VX nerve agent, which is, of course, prohibited under international law. And that, so we have to wonder what kind of message is being sent there. It's not simply that we will eliminate our enemies, but that we have stockpiles of this. I think they were quite slow to deny that.
Slow to deny that. We can welcome to the conversation Ji-Yoon Park, North Korean exile with the European Alliance for Human Rights in North Korea. You, on 2 occasions, escaped from North Korea. What's your reaction to this story?
Hello, my name is Ji-Hyun Park, once refugee escaped from North Korea. I was left North Korea first time was in 1998. It was massive bombing in North Korea. So took 3 million people died of starvation at this time. So first, my family member, my uncle died of starvation in front of me, and my father was illness, but North Korea has any medicines available in every citizens. Another disaster hit me was my brother also left his military was big problems because he was business in military and made loyalty money to regime, but his business was failed and also all these members punishment in military. So he left home, he left the military. So my father last wish was to save my brother. So I went to China with my brother, but I was established.
All right, we seem to be having technical issues with the sound. We're going to try to fix those and get back to Manchester with you, Ji-Hyun Park. Benoit Kennedy, let me just show you an image that's been circulating. The North Korean ambassador expelled in economy class, and authorities reportedly making sure, there you can see the photo, that he had a middle seat while being expelled. Is Malaysia handling this properly?
Yes, from the very beginning, if we have to understand the diplomatic row between North Korea and Malaysia, we have to take into account what happened to the North Korean ambassadors and how the North Koreans reacted. For them, they denied everything. They even denied that Kim Jong-nam was assassinated. According to them, it is a diplomat named Kim Chol. So according to them, still, as it is a diplomat, normally the corpse should have been delivered to the North Korean staff in Kuala Lumpur. The North Korean ambassador protested very vigorously, so he was expelled.
So they're not even admitting that it's
They're
Kim
not
Jong-nam.
even admitted who it is. But the main point concerning the mystery surrounding this death, which is quite incredible, why would a state react in such a way with a lot of people around? It is absolutely not a way to act in a discreet way. So one of the main reasons, and the main objection of the North Koreans, it is murdering system. They say it is not the VX because they told that such an agent, if it had been used, there would have been consequences for the two women who used it. So the North Korean ambassador acted in a very angry way, so he was expelled. So the images that we can see are, yes, are the images of someone who had an important position, but who are now just like another citizen, who are just expelled like any other citizen from a country who is no longer welcome.
All right, picking holes then in the story, or trying to, are the North Koreans. Christopher Hill, where's this going to lead? Because after all, Malaysia was one of the few countries where you had visa-free travel with North Korea.
Well, I'm sure Malaysia is going to be off that list pretty soon if they haven't already. I think it was, frankly, everyone who's pointed out how outrageous this is absolutely right. I don't think the North Koreans knew how to handle it, knew what to say. Probably the ambassador, though, may have saved his job by reacting in that totally inappropriate and angry way, because that would be what they wanted him to do in Pyongyang. So the question is, I mean, how is this going to play out? I don't see a real patching this up with Malaysian authorities. Malaysia's had a kind of tough patch of late with the airplane crash of last year, and I think they have developed, I think, a better way of handling international opinion, and in my view, they've done a very good job here. I think the issue, of course, is we have a country that just doesn't care what anyone else thinks. Those missile launches just yesterday suggest that they simply don't care what America thinks, what Japan thinks, what even China thinks, and what Malaysia thinks. So they are really kind of on their own. And I won't say we're totally on uncharted waters at this point, but certainly we have a regime that is just absolutely engaged in developing banned weapons, nuclear. Now we see they have nerve agents, sophisticated nerve agents as well, and they simply are as they've been often called in the past, a rogue nation. And so this is not going to get any better. And I think the Trump administration in the United States has to face the fact that in the coming 4 years, they probably will have a deliverable nuclear weapon. And I don't think you're going to hear the Trump administration say something like the Obama administration, which was that we need to show more strategic patience. I think there's going to be a real, we're going to come to a point where this becomes an absolute crisis.
An absolute crisis. One North Korean diplomat telling the UN this Tuesday at a forum that the exercises, the annual exercises that South Korea and the United States are right now doing are, quote, a major cause of escalation of tension that might turn into actual war. Now, from your time as ambassador at the State Department, Christopher Hill, how do you interpret such strong language?
The North Koreans don't mind saying the exact same thing for years and years and years, and certainly they have characterized these exercises over the years as being some kind of act of war. The fact is, these are exercises that are very necessary for the quality of the alliance. That is, we cannot have American troops based in Texas who then go to Korea for the first time if there's some kind of crisis. They need to go to Korea, work with the South Korean forces, understand the terrain, understand their mission in the event of another North Korean invasion. My only regret about exercises is I wish we had had them in the spring of 1950. Maybe that would have dissuaded North Korea in its invasion of South Korea. So we are not going to change that. And the North Koreans know that if they want to change in exercises, they need their own change of behavior. And they have agreed to give up their nuclear weapons. They've agreed to give up all their nuclear programs. And now they've walked away from that agreement and now ask for more discussions, more negotiations on the basis of nothing, on the basis of things that they would start out that next day saying, we want to talk. they won't admit that they've already agreed to certain things. So it would be like negotiating with someone who has amnesia with absolutely no memory of what they've already agreed to. So I think it is pretty fair to say the North Koreans are not serious about any kind of talks. They're not serious about living up to what they've agreed to. And so I think we really are going to reach a crisis point. And certainly one of the best things we can do is to be prepared for any and all contingencies, which is why we must continue to have these military exercises.
All right, you're mentioning there the beginning of the deployment of that terminal high altitude area defense system, THAAD as it's known. This just after North Korea fired missiles as far as 1,000 kilometers away off the coast of Japan. That setting alarm bells off all over for the North Koreans. The U.S. deployment is definitely on their minds.
How much pressure the enemies put on us with their maneuvers, our self-defense and military power will only keep getting stronger.
Our enemies, the U.S. and South Korea, are escalating tension by conducting military exercises in a bid to tarnish the sovereign dignity of the DPRK. Like the saying, a club is the best remedy for a mad dog. We will never tolerate those who treat us this way.
Adam Cathcart, that's what people are saying in front of the cameras. What is behind these tests? And you just heard Ambassador Hill saying that the North Koreans discarding previous negotiations. What's behind it all?
Well, I think we have to disaggregate sort of what is traditional, as Ambassador Hill noted, in North Korean strategy, and both in rhetoric and in action, and what is new and what is developing and what we need to be on guard for, or at least prepared to rebalance strategies against. And I think that their traditional anti-Japanese sentiment is very strong, and it's very true, I think, among the North Korean populace. I mean, launching a missile at Japan is not anything that people inside the DPRK are going to be terribly sad about doing because of the history of Japan's colonial rule over the Korean Peninsula from 1910 to 1945 and the bad blood that still remains and is stoked by the regime there. But what I think the North Koreans, from their standpoint, need to be wary of, it's not just Trump administration, it's not just American power, it's not just these military exercises. They themselves have noted they need to worry about ideological fracture within their own country, with ideological propaganda coming in from China. And they also need to be wary that they don't burn their bridges in Southeast Asia. Places like Singapore are still open to North Korea for business, and this recent assassination could really hurt them. So, and the final thing, I think, is with the missile tests, the other thing that's changing, that the continuity is less strong, is the Chinese support for the DPRK, for North Korea. It's much less overt than it had been in the past. They've cut off their coal imports from North Korean coal into China. That's a major revenue source for the North Korean regime. And China seems to be enforcing these sanctions more or less overtly. And I think that the North Koreans have even complained about China's willingness to enforce sanctions. So there's some things that are changing. Some things, as Ambassador Hill says quite correctly, haven't changed since 1950.
All right, the Chinese, you say, wavering over their support for Pyongyang. When we come back, we'll hear, though, that they're plenty angry about the deployment of that missile shield system by the Americans and the South Koreans. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.
You're watching France 24, I'm Mark Owen. These are the headlines. Another defeat for the UK Prime Minister Theresa May over Brexit. The Lords vote to insert another amendment into the agreement to leave the EU. Hungary is condemned by human rights groups after passing a law to arrest and detain all asylum seekers. The UN says Budapest is ignoring its international duties. Mosul, Iraq's army captures key buildings. Many have been destroyed, but their value is significant in the battle to force out the jihadists. The US anti-missile system being dispatched to South Korea has caused concern in the region. China sees the shield as a threat to its security, even though it's been sent as a response to North Korea's repeated missile and nuclear tests. For more, stay with us. You're watching France 24.
Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the escalation in the relationship between North Korea, its neighbors in certain instances, and also, of course, the United States. We're talking about it with the former U.S. ambassador to South Korea and former Assistant Secretary of State Christopher Hill, who's with the University of Denver. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Adam Cathcart of Leeds University, who joins us from Northern England, the author of Change and Continuity in North Korean Politics. From Manchester, North Korean exile Ji-yoon Park, who's with the European Alliance for Human Rights in North Korea, and also joining us, Benoit Kennedy, Vice President of the France-Korea Friendship Association. Welcome back to the show. Before I ask about how China is reacting to the latest developments, I want to point out, Ambassador Hill, that we've seen few statements from the Trump administration. We had the White House spokesperson, Sean Spicer, warning of very dire consequences after that missile launch by North Korea on Monday. The White House saying that the president emphasizing steps to enhance our ability to deter and defend against North Korea's ballistic missiles using the full range of United States military capabilities. We also saw written statements from the State Department, but there hasn't been, it seems, that much in terms of public pronouncemements. Why is that? Is Korea something that's not high on Donald Trump's mind?
Well, I think Korea is probably going to be the highest foreign policy issue on Donald Trump's mind, probably more so than the continued crisis in Syria and the broader Middle East. I think the real problem, if people have been following the events in Washington, the real problem is it has taken this administration a long time to get itself organized to govern. It's pretty clear that the Trump administration came into office somewhat surprised that they had won the election. By this time, in previous transfers of power, I mean, you've had a lot more people named and approved by the Senate. I recall when I came into the assistant secretaryship, I was already named in December and approved in January, and I think they're a long way off from getting an assistant secretary for Asian affairs. So I think they've kind of relied on old talking points and certainly on reassuring allies such as Japan and South Korea. But they clearly are not kind of ready. You normally want to have some studies of, what's been done before. What should our position be? I think during this four-year Trump term, we're going to see administration that will take a very tough view on North Korea. Will not be talking about strategic patience, but rather will be kind of pushing things really hard. The real issue is not that they haven't kind of come up with a policy of their own, which they really haven't yet. The real issue is that when you look at the menu of those policies, there's nothing terribly appealing. I mean, after all, you have 14,000 artillery pieces aimed at population centers in South Korea. So, just kind of threatening war is not necessarily a good approach to take. And so I think the Trump administration is kind of back on their heels when they look at the kind of paucity of any really good options. Certainly one of the good options is the full deployment of this terminal high altitude area defense weapon, which is one of the most successful elements of missile defense, and I think will provide a measure of assistance here. It's obviously upset the Chinese, but frankly, the Chinese need to understand that as long as they don't kind of sit on the North Koreans, and whether or not they've denied them or they've stopped these coal exports, they really have not been successful in terms of reining in North Korea. So they need to understand that we're not going to sit around and advocate patience. We're going to try to do some things, and certainly THAAD is one of them. So I think the Chinese are really going to have to step up their game. I don't think there's any outsourcing of this problem to China. I think China has to work with the United States and others on this, but China can't be advocating patience to us, because I think we've gotten to the point where this is getting very, very dangerous.
Getting to the point where it's very, very dangerous. Let me ask Adam Cathcart, how dangerous is it? And you were mentioning in part one of our discussion how the Chinese were wavering in their support of Pyongyang, the deployment of this missile shield by the U.S. and South Korea. Is that going to change Beijing's mind?
Well, if anything, the deployment of the missile shield, according to the people around Xi Jinping who made up his mind long ago that this was bad for China's national interest and was aimed against China and was part of the plot to contain China, this 中国威胁论, they call it, the theory to contain China or to intimidate China. I don't think he's going to be terribly moved to change and to put more pressure on Pyongyang as a result of THAAD. In the long term, it's hard to see that. And when you talk to Chinese scholars and sort of party people in sort of more relaxed moments, they will tell you that there's no space inside of China to be debating against THAAD. There is no domestic push against this. So the American logic that somehow China's going to feel the pain because of THAAD, and this is going to create antagonism toward North Korea among the Chinese populace, whose information is controlled by the CCP or the Chinese Communist Party, it's a bit of an overly complex equation. I think what the THAAD deployment means, though, and it shows China's willingness to really put pressure on South Korea, both economically and in other ways. And that means, by definition, that it's better news for Pyongyang. So one of the things that we've seen, even after the most recent big test of February 2017, is you had a lot of speculation, including by people like me, about sort of these coal exports, and China was really putting the screws down on North Korea. And then you had a vice foreign minister going to Beijing from Pyongyang and spending 4 or 5 days. And all that goes more or less unreported. There wasn't much big splash there. But they've got time to talk to one another. It may be that the most recent missile test was choreographed or telegraphed to the Chinese Communist Party by the North Koreans. So I think it's a long-term party-to-party relationship between the Chinese Communist Party and the Korean Workers' Party. And issues like Ji-hyun Park talked about, sort of North Korean refugees, it's part of the relationship. But I think China's not too worried about sort of the big picture, in the sense that North Korea has a certain amount of danger, but it also has a certain amount of advantage in keeping the region in balance. So they're willing to live with it, I think.
All right. It sounds from what you're saying that North Korea sort of has a plan. They know what they're doing. Ji-hyun Park, what are your thoughts on the way that South Korea and the United States are handling all of this?
On Sunday, North Korea launched a missile test, and after now, USA and South Korea published some about warning letter. But it's China. China is the state dependentship North Korea government. But the Chinese government don't think about the North Korean refugees. They say that North Korean refugees, illegal migrant people. So North Korean government sent back the North Korean refugees who lives in China. So nowadays, many North Korean refugees are dangerous in China side, and many North Korean women human trafficking or sex traded in Chinese place, and also 20,000 the child who was born in North Korean mother and born in China. They denied their nationality and ID cards. So many children no options to go to the school, or they illness, they can't go to hospital freely.
Yeah, they're basically with no status. Christopher Hill, I know you have to leave us, so just one final quick question on this. Are ordinary Koreans being forgotten in the mix?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, look, dealing with North Korea, you cannot solve this problem by just, thickening up missile defense. You cannot solve this problem by just outsourcing issues to China. You need a kind of comprehensive strategy. You need it to be sort of up there at the top of the agenda of the administration. I think it is. I think in terms of the refugees from North Korea, I think South Korea has done a pretty good job. They get a lot of criticism for what they do, but I think they've done a good job. And frankly speaking, I think the United States needs to do a better job on this. I think the most complex part of this whole equation is China. The U.S. is not trying to deploy THAAD in order to threaten the Chinese so that the Chinese will somehow do more to North Korea. I don't think it's quite that convoluted. I think what the United States is trying to do is tell the South Korean people that the United States takes seriously its obligations under the alliance to help South Korea protect itself from North Korea. The Chinese have been very upset about that because they feel that they have always had the view that the U.S. Exaggerates the threat from North Korea, or worse yet, uses the threat from North Korea as a sort of proxy for a sort of contained China policy. And the Chinese have kind of held to this position, or I should say, many Chinese believe this. And I think the solution to this is the U.S. and China need to have a kind of deep dive on our mutual views on North Korea. I think one of those issues has to be what China's opinion would be of an eventual unification of the Korean Peninsula under the successor state, the Republic of Korea. So here the U.S. needs to be careful not to be doing things over the heads of the South Koreans. After all, the whole purpose is to work with South Korea. So they have to be careful that South Koreans don't feel that the U.S. is trying to cut some deal with China. At the same time, I think the U.S. needs to be pretty clear to the Chinese that if they are so interested in stability, they may not be getting stability with the likes of Kim Jong-un, and that the U.S., together with the South Koreans, have no intention of diminishing China's strategic position, that is, of putting listening posts on the Yalu River or troops up on the Yalu River or something like this. And so I think there needs to be a much more serious dialogue with the Chinese. And this is where I think the Trump administration needs to start setting some priorities. If they really want a trade war with China, maybe this isn't a particularly good time for that. If they really want to go very confrontational with China, that's certainly not going to be matched by an ability to work with China on North Korea, because I think the Chinese tend to put this all together. And I think the Chinese are kind of worried about how this new administration is looking at China, the whole issue, the whole kerfuffle earlier about the one China policy. These kinds of things are kind of damaging in terms of the ability to work systematically and in depth with the Chinese over an issue that, frankly speaking, I mean, North Korea is not ever going to be a stable element in Northeast Asia. And the sooner the Chinese understand that their future would be better served by a united Korean Peninsula, the better.
Ambassador Hill, many thanks for joining us here in the France 24 debate. I want to turn now to Benoit Kennedy and your reaction to what you heard. What are your views on breaking the impasse? You just heard Christopher Hill say that at some point, the U.S. and China, if they tone down their rhetoric, if they can see what those two big nations agree upon, that will perhaps have a solution when it comes to Korea.
Yes, it is very important because China, of course, it sides with North Korea concerning THAAD, but it is not so simple. China strongly opposes the nuclear military program of North Korea. So China wants stability first. And it is also very important because in the past, when there was resolutions in the United Nations concerning North Korea, both China and the United States side together. So now it is a very difficult position for China because not only China, but also Russia strongly opposed the THAAD system. On one important position, because we heard about reaction in South Korea, we have to know that in South Korea, in upcoming weeks or months, mostly month, there will be an presidential election in South Korea. Yeah. The president sides with the conservative, but she was impeached in last December.
And she could be removed from office soon.
She could be moved maybe as soon as this week. So it means that we have also to take into account the position of the South Korean public opinion. Concerning the South Korean public opinion, she's strongly opposed to the THAAD system. So now the South Korean public opinion got the impression that they are trying to get the THAAD system as soon as possible. Because if opposition wins the next presidential election in South Korea, which is a strong probability, the South Korean opposition said that they oppose to the THAAD system. So every time there was diplomatic wars around the North Korean peninsula, in the long run, people discussed together. As was said by Mr. Ambassador Hill, every time the United States got the impression that they sold twice the same horse. So now they accept to discuss, but only if there is something to discuss. So in this configuration, two important actors can play a big role. Of course, China, because China wants stability on the Korean Peninsula. We can imagine, for example, that China could say to the United States, well, okay, just go away, just stop a THAAD system, and we can promise you that we'll try to push on North Korea not to have nuclear weapons any longer. We can imagine such a process. The problem is North Korea is not a satellite of China, so it is very difficult.
It's its own country.
Yes. Another point which is important, Donald Trump, what is your opinion about it? Because we listen a lot about the diplomats, we listen a lot about the State Department, but what does Mr. Trump think about it? It is his first big international crisis. How will he react? And Mr. Trump told he was a way to take an hamburger with the leader, the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. I don't know if he will take an hamburger, but concerning him, he has to reach an agreement to show that he's a strong leader. So maybe Russia, which is another important actor, Russia, which also opposed to the THAAD system, he has good relations with Russia. Maybe we can imagine that Mr. Putin will take a role in such a configuration. It will be for Russia, which aspires to have a bigger part in the Korean Peninsula, to play a bigger role. It is a possibility.
Adam Cathcart, what is your guess on how Donald Trump sees the resolution of the crisis with North Korea?
Well, I think Donald Trump's views of East Asia are locked into a rather, maybe a point of view that's 20, 30 years old, and those are slowly getting updated. I think one of the most interesting things, just to branch off of what Benoit was talking about, is how the Abe Shinzo, the Japanese Prime Minister, Donald Trump relationship has really seemed to take priority over the Trump administration's contacts with South Korea. Michael Flynn, who the now deposed, resigned, fired, whatever, national security advisor, had met with counterparts in South Korea. They seem to be moving forward, Defense Secretary Mattis, with a rather traditional approach, the Americans are, and this THAAD deployment is certainly part of that, as Ambassador Hill mentioned, kind of robust support of the alliance. So there are these kind of structural things moving forward, but this relationship between Abe and Trump is, we could see a kind of bifurcation in the year ahead, where U.S.-Japan relations actually are quite solid, where the Japanese right wing or center-right party, the LDP, feels emboldened to sort of take more vigorous steps against North Korea. But we have an election in South Korea where the United States has maybe overplayed its hand, where China's anti-THAAD propaganda and its kind of holding the sword over the South Korean economy has actually worked, and the South Korean left then goes for a candidate who wants to sort of move the United States anti-missile program out. Ultimately, maybe doesn't even want to see the Americans there at all.
Adam, let's just give some context on let's give some context on that point, because it's important about how it's putting a strain on ties between China and South Korea. The South Korean conglomerate Lotte finds itself in the eye of the storm for swapping land it owned so that the missile defense shield could be deployed there. It's now the target of a boycott and claims it was the subject of a cyber attack launched by hacks with Chinese IP addresses. Seoul denouncing retaliatory measures by Beijing and say it may file a complaint with the World Trade Organization.
Well, I think this is the problem.
China is taking measures against the deployment of THAAD in several ways. We will continue to maintain our stance that the deployment of THAAD is an action taken based on our right to self-defense, for our national security, and the safety of our people.
Adam Cathcart.
Well, I think this is part of the problem with thinking that the North Korean-Chinese relationship is going to implode. You see a very vigorous movement spearheaded by the Chinese Communist Party to oppose the deployment of THAAD, and in Chinese media it's been, which I read every day, it's been overwhelmingly anti-South Korean versus anti-North Korean, in spite of the fact that North Korea has been engaging in what are termed in our media sphere provocations. Just to come back very quickly, though, to something Ji-hyun Park mentioned, and this kind of, and that Ambassador Hill mentioned as well, to connect these 2 points. The Trump administration has really failed under Rex Tillerson to put any human rights pressure on North Korea at all. There was no spokesman for the State Department who was willing to put his or her name on a recent broad human rights report that included North Korea. There's been little discussion about the reappointment of a special envoy for human rights. There's a lot of traditional energy in the American body politic, as well as in South Korea, that is mobilized and organized around critiquing North Korean human rights and if advocating for North Korean refugees in China. That is completely absent. So people like Samantha Power at the United Nations, Barack Obama's ambassador there, was extremely vigorous, getting to know North Korean defectors. The Secretary of State, John Kerry. I know that the Republican Party is no fan necessarily of John Kerry, but you have to say that Kerry and Power were much, much stronger on the human rights issue than this so-called Christian conservative government that we see in Washington today. So it's a very, very, there's some very prickly relations going on now, I think, within the Trump administration, and there's some, I would hope, some kind of an internal discussion about, is this human rights pressure going to be brought to bear on North Korea, or is that something we choose to give up in the hopes that negotiating with North Korea, that they'll sort of say, oh, well, thank you for reducing at least that pressure. You can talk about assassinating our leader and cyber hacking our missile program, but thanks for not going after us in the human rights issue. I'm not sure that the United States has much to gain by taking the foot off the accelerator in that front.
Adam Cathcart, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us from Leeds. I want to thank as well Ji-Yoon Park for being with us from Manchester.